Stolen Brains by Captain S. P. Meek. Part 2 of 4. Side by side, Carnes and the doctor dropped toward the ground. The Douglas flew silently away into the night. Carnes found that the sensation of falling was not an unpleasant one as soon as he got accustomed to it. There was little sensation of motion, and it was not until a sharp whisper from Dr. Bird called it to his attention that he realized that he was almost to the ground. He bent his legs as he had been instructed, and landed without any great jar. As he rose, he saw that Dr. Bird was already on his feet and was eagerly searching the ground with the spectroscope which he had brought with him in the jump. "Fold your parachute, Carnes, and we'll stow them away under a rock where they can't be seen. We won't use them again." Carnes did so, and deposited the silk bundle beside the doctor's, and they covered them with rocks until they would be invisible from the air. "Follow me," said the doctor, as he strode carefully forward, stopping now and then to take a sight with the spectroscope. Carnes followed him as he made his way up a small hill which blocked the way. A hiss from Dr. Bird stopped him. Dr. Bird had dropped flat on the ground, and Carnes, on all fours, crawled forward to join him. He smothered an exclamation as he looked over the crest of the hill. Before him, sitting in a hollow in the ground, was the huge globe which had spirited away Major Trowbridge. "This is evidently their landing place," whispered Dr. Bird. "The next thing to find is their hiding place." He rose and started forward, but sank at once to the ground and dragged Carnes down with him. On the hill which formed the opposite side of the hollow, a line of sight showed for an instant, as though a door had been opened. The light disappeared and then reappeared, and as they watched it, widened, and against an illuminated background, 4 men appeared, carrying a 5th. The door shut behind them, and they made their way slowly towards the waiting globe. They laid down their burden, and one of them turned a flashlight on the globe and opened a door in its side through which they hoisted their burden. They all entered the globe. The door closed, and with a light whirring sound, it rose in the air and moved rapidly towards the northeast. "That's the place we're looking for," muttered Dr. Bird. "We'll go around this hollow and look for it. Be careful where you step. They must have a ventilation somewhere, if their laboratory is underground." Followed by the Secret Service operative, the doctor made his way along the edge of the hollow. They did not dare to show a light, and it was slow work feeling their way forward, inch by inch. When they had reached a point above where the doctor thought the light had been, he paused. "There must be a ventilation shaft somewhere around here," he whispered, his mouth not an inch from Carnes' ear. "And we've got to find it. It would never do to try the door. If any of them are still there, it is sure to be guarded. You will go up the hill for 500 yards, and I'll go down. Quarter back and forth on a 200-yard front, and work carefully. Don't fall in, whatever you do. We'll return to this point every time we pass it and report." The operative nodded, and walked in a few yards up the hill and made his way slowly forward. He went 100 yards, as nearly as he could judge, and then stepped 5 yards further up the hill and made his way back. As he passed the starting point, he approached, and Dr. Bird's figure rose up. "Any luck?" he whispered. Dr. Bird shook his head. "We'll try further," he said. "I think it is probably beyond us, so suppose you go 15 yards up, and I'll quarter the same as before." Carnes nodded and stole silently away. 15 yards up the hill he went, and then paused. He stood on the crest of the hill, and before him was a steep, almost precipitous slope. He made his way along the edge for a few yards, and then paused. Faintly, he could detect a murmur of voices. Inch by inch, he crept forward, going over the ground underfoot. He paused and listened intently, and decided that the sound must come from the slope beneath him. A glance at his watch told him that he had spent 10 minutes on this trip, and he made his way back to the meeting place. Dr. Bird was waiting for him, and, in a low whisper, Carnes reported his discovery. The doctor went back with him, and together they renewed the search. The slope of the hill was almost sheer, and Carnes looked dubiously over the edge. "I wish we had brought the parachutes," he whispered to the doctor. "We could have taken the ropes off of them, and you could have lowered me over the edge." Dr. Bird chuckled softly and tugged at his middle. Carnes watched him with astonishment in the dim light, but he understood when Dr. Bird thrust the end of a strong but light silk cord into his hands. He looped it under his arms, and the doctor, with whispered instructions, lowered him over the cliff. The doctor lowered him for a few feet and then stopped in response to a jerk on the free end. A moment later, Carnes signaled to be drawn up and soon stood beside the doctor. "That's the place, all right," he whispered. "The whole cliff is covered with creepers, and there is a tree growing right close to it. If we can anchor the cord here, I think that we can slide down to a safe hold on the tree." A tree stood near, and the silk cord was soon fastened. Carnes disappeared over the cliff, and in a few moments, Dr. Bird slid down the cord to join him. He found the detective seated in the crotch of a tree, only a few feet from the face of the cliff. From the cliff came a pronounced murmur of voices. Dr. Bird drew in his breath in excitement and moved forward along the branch. He touched the stone, and after a moment of searching, he cautiously raised one corner of a painted canvas flap and peered into the cliff. He watched for a few seconds and then slid back and silently pulled Carnes toward him. Together, the two men made their way toward the cliff, and Dr. Bird raised the corner of the flap and they peered into the hill. Before them was a cave fitted up as a cross between a laboratory and a hospital. Almost directly opposite them, and at the left of a door in the farther wall, was a ray machine of some sort. It was a puzzle to Carnes, and even Dr. Bird, although he could grasp the principle at a glance, was at a loss to divine its use. From a set of coils attached to a generator was connected a tube of the Crookes tube type, with the rays from it gathered and thrown by a parabolic reflector into the space where a man's head would rest when he was seated in a white metal chair with rubber-insulated feet which stood beneath it. An operating table occupied the other side of the room, while a gas cylinder and other common hospital apparatus stood around, ready for use. Seated at a table which occupied the center of the room were three men. The sound of their voices rose from an indistinct murmur to audibility as the flap was raised, and the watchers could readily understand their words. Two of them sat with their faces toward the main entrance, and the third man faced them. Carnes bit his lip as he looked at the man at the head of the table. He was twisted and misshapen in body, a grotesque dwarf with a hunched back, not over 4 feet in height. His massive head, sunken between his hunched shoulders, showed a tremendous dome of cranium, and a brow wider and even higher than Dr. Bird's. The rest of his face was lined and drawn, as though by years of acute suffering. Sharp black eyes glared bright from deep, sunk caverns. The dwarf was entirely bald. Even the brushy eyebrows, which would be expected from his face, were missing.
"They ought to be getting back,"
said the dwarf sharply. "If they get back at all," said one of the two figures facing him.
"What do you mean?"
growled the dwarf, his eyes glittering ominously.
"They'll return, all right. They know they'd better."
"They'll return if they can, but I tell you again, Slavatsky, I think it was a piece of foolishness to try to take 2 men in one night. We got Bird all right, but it is getting too late for a second one, and they had to take Bird over 100 miles, and then go nearly 300 more for Williams. The news about Bird may have been discovered and spread, and others may be out looking for us. Carnes might have recovered."
"Didn't he get a full dose of Letane?"
"So Frick says. And Bird certainly had a full dose, but I can't help but feel uneasy. Operations were going too nicely on schedule, and you had to break it up and take on an extra case in the same night as a scheduled one. I tell you, I don't like it."
"I'm sorry that I did that, Carson, but only because the results were so poor. We had planned on Williams for a month, and I wanted him. And Bird was so easy that I couldn't resist it."
"And what did you get? Not as much menthium as would have come from an ordinary bookkeeper."
"I'll admit that Bird is a grossly overrated man. He must have worked in sheer luck in his work in the past, for there was nothing in his brain to show it above average. We got barely enough menthium to replace what we used in capturing him."
"We ought to have taken Carnes and left Boyd alone," snorted Carson. "Even a wooden-headed detective ought to have given us a better supply than Bird yielded."
"We are bound to meet with disappointments once in a while. I had marked Bird down long ago, as soon as I could get a chance at him."
"Well, you ran that show, Slavatsky, but I'll warn you that we aren't going to let you pull off another one like it. I take no more crazy chances, even on your orders." The hunchback rose to his feet, eyes glittering ominously.
"What do you mean, Carson?"
he asked slowly, his hand slipping behind him as he spoke.
"Don't try any rough stuff, Slavatsky," warned Carson sharply. "I can pull a tube as fast as you can, and I'll do it if I have to."
Gentlemen, protested the third man, rising. "We are all too deep in this to quarrel. Sit down, and let's talk this over. Carson is just worried."
"What is there to be worried about?"
grunted the dwarf as he slid back into his chair.
"Everything has gone nicely so far, and no suspicion has been raised."
"Maybe it has, and then maybe it hasn't," growled Carson. "I think this Boyd episode tonight looks bad. In the first place, it came too opportunely and too easy. In the second place, Boyd should have yielded more menthium. And in the third place, did you notice his hands? They weren't the type of hands to expect on a man of his type."
"Nonsense. They were acid-stained."
"Acid stains can be put on. It might be all right, but I'm worried. While we are talking about this matter, there's another thing I want cleared up."
"What is it?"
"I think, Slavatsky, that you are holding out on us. You are getting more than your share of the menthium."
Again, the dwarf leaped to his feet, but the peacemaker intervened. "Carson has a right to look at the records, Slavatsky," he said. "I am satisfied, but I'd like to look at them too. None of us have seen them for 2 months." The dwarf glared, at first one, and then the other.
"All right,"
he said shortly, and limped to a cabinet on the wall. He drew a key from his pocket and opened it, and pulled out a leather-bound book.
"Look all you please. I was supposed to get the most. It was my idea."
"You would have get 1 share and a half, while Willis, Frink, and I got 1 share each, and the rest half a share," said Carson. "I know how much has been given, and it won't take me but a minute to check up."
He bent over the book, but Willis interrupted. "Better put it away, Carson," he said. "Here come the rest, and we don't want them to know we suspect anything." He pointed toward a disc on the wall, which had begun to glow. Slavatsky looked at it and grasped the book from Carson and replaced it in the cabinet. He moved over and started the generator, and the tube began to glow with the violet light. A noise came from the outside, and the door opened. 4 men entered, carrying a fifth, whom they propped up in the chair under the glowing tube.
"Did everything go all right?"
asked the dwarf eagerly. "Smooth as silk," replied one of the 4. "I hope we get some results this time." The dwarf bent over the ray apparatus and made some adjustments, and the head of the unconscious man was bathed with a violet glow. For 3 minutes, the flood of light poured on his head, and then the dwarf shut off the light, and Carson and Willis lifted the figure and laid it on the operating table. The dwarf bent over the man and inserted the needle of a hypodermic syringe into the back of the neck at the base of the brain. The needle was an extremely long one, and Dr. Bird gasped as he saw 4 inches of shining steel buried in the brain of the unconscious man. Slowly, Slavatsky drew back the plunger of the syringe, and Dr. Bird could see it was being filled with an amber fluid. For 2 minutes, the slow work continued until a speck of red appeared in the glass syringe barrel.
7.5 cubic centimeters,
cried the dwarf in a tone of delight.
"Fine!" cried Carson. "That's a record, isn't it?"
"No, we got 8 once. Now hold him carefully while I return some of it."
Slavatsky slowly pressed home the plunger, and a portion of the amber fluid was returned to the patient's skull. Presently, he withdrew the needle and straightened up and held it toward the light.
6 centimeters net, he announced. Take him back, Frink. I'll give Carson and Vils their share now, and we'll take care of the rest of you when you return. I'll give Carson and Vils their share now, and we'll take care of the rest of you when you return. Is the ship well stocked?
Enough for 2 or 3 more trips.
In that case, I'll inject this whole lot. Better get going, Frink. It's pretty late.
The 4 men who had brought the patient in stepped forward and lifted him from the table and bore him out. Dr. Bird dropped the canvas screen and strained his ears. A faint whir told him that the globe had taken to the air. He slid back along the limb of the tree until he touched the rope and silently climbed, hand over hand, until he gained the crest. He bent his back to the task of raising Carnes, and the operative soon stood beside him on the ledge surmounting the cliff. "What on earth were they doing?" asked Carnes in a whisper.
That was Professor Williams of Yale. They were depriving him of his memory. There will be another amnesia case in the papers tomorrow. I haven't time to explain their methods now. We've got to act. You have a flashlight?
Yes, and my gun. Shall we break in? There are only 3 of them, and I think we could handle the lot.
Yes, but the others may return at any time, and we want to bag the whole lot. They've done their damage for tonight. You heard my orders to Lieutenant Maynard, didn't you?
Yes.
He should be somewhere in these hills to the south with assistance of some sort. The signal to them is 3 long flashes, followed in turn by 3 short ones, and 3 more long. Go and find them and bring them here. When you get close, give me the same light signal, and don't try to break in unless I'm with you. I am going to reconnoiter a little more and make sure there's no back entrance through which they can escape. Good luck, Carnes. Hurry all you can. There is no time to be lost. The Secret Service operative stole away into the night, and Dr. Bird climbed back down the rope and took his place at the window. Willis lay on the operating table unconscious, while Slavatsky and Carson studied the now partially emptied syringe. "You gave him his full share, all right," Carson was saying. "I guess you are playing square with us. I'll take mine now." He lay down on the operating table, and the dwarf fitted an anesthesia cone over his face and opened the valve of the gas cylinder. In a moment he closed it and rolled the unconscious man on his face and deftly inserted the long needle. Instead of injecting a portion of the contents of the syringe, as Dr. Bird had expected to do, he drew back on the plunger for a minute and then took out the needle and held the syringe to the light.
"Well, Mr. Carson,"
he said, with a malignant glance at the unconscious figure.
"That recovers the dose you got a couple weeks ago while Willis watched me. I don't think you really need any menthium. Your brain is too active to suit me as it is."
He gave an evil chuckle and walked to the far side of the cave and opened a secret panel. He drew from a recess a flask and carefully emptied a portion of the contents of the syringe into it. He replaced the flask and closed the panel, and with another chuckle, he limped over to a chair and threw himself down in it. For an hour he sat motionless, and Dr. Bird carefully worked his way back along the branch and climbed the rope and started for the hollow. A faint whirring noise attracted his attention, and he could see the faintly luminous globe in the distance, rapidly approaching. It came to a stop at the spot where it had previously landed, and 4 men got out. Instead of going toward the cave, they towed the globe, which floated a few inches from the earth, towards the side of the hill farthest from where the doctors stood. 3 of them held it, while the 4th went forward and bent over some controls on the ground. A creaking sound came through the night, and the men moved forward with the globe. Presently its movement stopped, and men reappeared. Again came the creaking sound, and the glow faded out, as though a screen had been drawn in front of it. The 4 men walked toward the door of the cave. Dr. Bird dropped flat on the ground and saw them pause a few yards below him on the hill and again work some hidden controls. A glare of light showed for an instant, and they disappeared, and everything was quiet again. Dr. Bird debated the advisability of returning to the window, but decided against it and moved down the face of the hill. Inch by inch, he went over the ground, but found nothing. In the darkness he could not locate the door, and he made his way around to the back of the hill. The precipice loomed above him, and he swept it in with his gaze. But he could locate no opening in the darkness, and he dared not use a flashlight. As he turned, he faced the east, and noticed with a start of surprise the sky was getting red. He glanced at his watch and found that Carnes had been gone for nearly 3 hours.
"Great Scott!" he exclaimed in surprise. "Time has gone faster than I realized. He ought to be back at any time now."
He mounted the highest point of the hill and sent 3 long flashes, followed in turn by 3 short, and 3 more long to the south, and watched eagerly for an answer. He waited 5 minutes and repeated the signal, but no answering flashes came from the empty hills. With a grunt which may have meant anything, he turned and made his way towards the opposite side of the hollow, where the globe had disappeared. Here he met with more luck. He had marked the location with extreme care, and he had not spent over 20 minutes feeling over the ground before his hand encountered a bit of metal. As he pulled on it, his eyes sought the side of the hill. The dawn had grown sufficiently bright for him to see the result of his action. A portion of the hill folded back, and the faintly glowing ship became visible. With a muttered exclamation of triumph, he approached it. The globe was about 9 feet in diameter and was without visible doors or windows. Around and around it the doctor went, searching for an entrance. The ship now rested solidly on the ground. He failed to find what he sought, and his sensitive hands began to go over it, searching for an irregularity. He had covered nearly half of it before his finger found a hidden button and pressed it. Silently, a door in the side of the craft opened, and he advanced to enter. "Keep them up," a sharp voice said behind him. Dr. Bird froze into an instant immobility, and the voice spoke again. "Turn around." Dr. Bird turned and looked full into the eye of a revolver held by the man the dwarf had addressed as Frank. Behind Frank stood the dwarf and 3 other men. As his eye fell on Dr. Bird, Frank turned momentarily pale and staggered back, the revolver waving as he did so. Dr. Bird made a lightning-like grab for his own weapon, but before he could draw it, Frank had recovered, and the revolver was again steady.
"Dr. Bird!"
gasped Slavatsky.
"Impossible!"
"Get his gun, Harris," said Frank. End of Stolen Brains by Captain S.P. Meek. Narrated by Miranda Colleen Johnson. This is the end of Part 2 of 4.